we got a little bit of controversy. So if you like a little bit of drama and a little bit of entertainment, this might be the conversation for you. The title is NFTs in Context, Curating Crypto Art. We have an art dealer and an art curator that are going to discuss their perspective on it. Let's give a warm round of applause for Tina and Abigail.
Aaron made it.
And Aaron made it, my man. Diversity, it's a key thing. Enjoy.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So we wanted to jump straight into it, and we'll kick off with our introductions. But all of us, I think, come from at least a traditional art background, not necessarily like traditional physical art, but kind of the art ecosystem that's like not necessarily Web3 ecosystem, and we've been bridging. So my name's Abigail Miller, and I'm the Associate Director of Web3 at NFT.London. And NFT.London, in the last 3 years, have started a Web3 branch to really bridge these ecosystems because they operate in very different manners, and we'll get into that about curation. But if Tina, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tina Ziegler. I'm the director of Moniker International Art Fair. I'm also the founder of Avatar. I also have an academy called the Ziegler Academy where I teach art curation and art management. And I am an art curator in its traditional form. I am now in the Web3 space, and I curate digital art alongside traditional tangible art.
And Aaron?
And I'm Aaron Wilcox. I am a traditional artist, painter first and foremost, but I'm also the creative director for the Meta Musée. So a little bit of curation is involved there, but I'm more so the artist type.
Yeah, and I think we were all talking before this panel, curation has really turned into like a buzzword in Web3. And I think everyone, in my opinion, kind of misunderstands what curation actually is. Curation is not selection. It is not selling the artwork. It's not just highlighting the artwork on Twitter. To me, curation is a profession. A lot of curators train to reach the point. A lot of them have PhDs. Even the self-taught ones have so many years behind them to get to the point where they are. You can't just jump in and being like, I'm a curator because I have good taste. And that's my opinion. I guess, do you guys disagree or agree?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I'm like, you know, if you haven't done 30 exhibitions, then you can't call yourself a curator yet, right? So I'm like in the hundreds now, and I've been curating for 20 years. And for me, curating is such a responsibility, right? You are responsible for telling a story from an artist or an art movement, and you're having to present that story in a way that is accessible, digestible to the public, right? You are the storyteller. You have to analyze what's going on in a market or an industry, identify specific artists or trends, put that up, package that together, write papers about it, do extensive research, and then present it in a way where the public feels immersed, there's an experience there, and that they can leave understanding what the exhibition concept or the body of work was about, right? So we have real responsibilities, I think especially in the digital art world at the moment, is to help other people understand this space through the power of curation. Right, and it's a big challenge now because there's a lot of people coming into the digital art space that might understand art selection. You know, they like, I've been looking at art, I like to have my feed, I have my Tumblr, I have my Instagram, and then they're producing these shows, but they kind of forget the education side, or they forget the storytelling element, or they forget the narration around the work that is so essential. So I think we need to take a moment and we need to go, okay, what is the objective of a storyteller in this Web3 space, and how can we really work with curators to help tell the story of digital art to more people from different backgrounds?
Sure. And what do you think, Aaron, as well?
No, I totally agree. The people get scared off when you bring up curation because it feels like gatekeeping, and that's not at all what it is. Much like you said, Tina, where it's about the storytelling and bringing people in, not just for the art, but for the feelings that all of the art brings you and what you're trying to do for the show. So it's not at all the gatekeeping that everybody fears as much as it is, but it's more so just the hype, the storytelling right behind the art.
Yeah, and for me, I think curation's actually been one of the largest issues in this space, is because I truly believe if you're going to be a curator in this space, you need to have an understanding of the technology. You can't just be a traditional curator that specializes in like modern contemporary art and then make the jump. You really do have to have an understanding, but it's also vice versa. And I think we see a lot of narratives and almost the same artists being chosen over and over in the space because people aren't diving into the history and research as much as they should, and it's very following market trends. As well as I think there's a narrative of this artwork, AI, generative artwork, and just digital artwork that's, oh, this has only arisen in the last 5 years, and that's not true. Digital media has over 100 years of history. Generative art got its origins in the 1960s, and AI art has been really around since the 1960s, getting its form in the 80s and 90s. It's not just Midjourney. A lot of AI artists create the diffuser programs as well as like neural pathways and like are building this. It's not just a blanket statement. And I think what we see a lot in this space is very surface level curation. But that's my opinion.
No, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think because there's so much excitement and new energy in this space, and we have seen a lot of artists, become very successful. Some of them not having an art background, and so which is wonderful, right? Which is fantastic, and that's why we're all here, because there's this new, fresh energy. You don't have to climb this hierarchy to become successful anymore. The walls and the boundaries are breaking in front of our eyes, which is so amazing to see, especially in the art market, right? Like all the traditional ladders you had to climb as an artist kind of don't exist anymore if you don't want them to. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. However, I think, the problem is we saw like the rise of digital art over the past couple years, people starting to collect digital art, and then of course, then people starting to exhibit digital art. And like the previous speakers were talking about, now the industry is starting to go, oh, right, okay, we maybe do need curators in this space to make it more robust, to bring it more professionalism, to really create a wider audience for this work. And I think now, after all the hype is exploded and people are calming down, there is this opportunity for people like us that work specifically as curators to come in and help direct the future of this conversation. And yeah, gatekeeping is not it, but it's very much about bringing some professionalism to a very, very new space. And I mean that in a very positive way and not trying to talk shit. But I think it's really important that we exist now in this moment. Just to give you an example, a real life example. So this week is Digital Art Week in London, produced by some amazing people with a lot of ambition. But up until last night, nobody had any consideration of curating the digital art content, right? So they had a whole Google Drive folder of amazing artwork from all these amazing artists, obviously all different pixel ratio, all different size, different bit rates, like everything was different. You have 30 artists, but how are you going to present them in a place like Outernet? And if you don't know what Outernet is London's largest digital art gallery. It has just opened in Tottenham Court Road. I highly recommend to go experience this space. It's phenomenal. But you can't just ping a JPEG to those screens and hope it plays, right? You have to look at each file individually. What is the order of the work that's going to be presented? Does it fit the screen size? What is the viewer going to experience? There are so many things to consider when we think about how we experience and ingest digital content. So that has been an eye-opener for them. I've come on literally in the past 24 hours and was managed to curate and render all this content. So fingers crossed, it actually works. But it's a real job, right? And I have no tech background. So as a curator, I studied a lot about how do we work with screens, right? It's not just something I assumed I should figure out. I needed to figure this out to actually become a digital art curator. And I say it like that because it doesn't really exist yet, like being just a digital art curator. It's happening.
It's happening, yeah.
No, I totally agree with the entire basis. I find it's all about consistency. You know, it's all about looking at a screen and being able to see what it's supposed to be, the consistency of the image there, and going in through the entire show, making sure that everything is consistent and follows the same path and guidelines for what the story or the tale that you're trying to tell throughout your show. So I think that's the most important thing for me is just consistency.
What I think is really unique about this space, though, is NFT crypto art in this digital format. Most of it is created and consumed on a computer or phone screen. And that's a very different consumer base and audience than having a physical exhibition. So I think actually one of the hardest questions is when you go to a physical exhibition now of this artwork, is it just simply a screen? And working with artists in like a gallery and a lot of these digital galleries, the conversation is, how do you want to exhibit? How do you want to install it? I personally don't. Some artwork should be consumed like in an LG or Samsung screen, but that's not the only way to exhibit this artwork. There's such a history of installation works. But then it gets really tricky into how much of the screen is the artwork. Is the artwork only like these digital files, or if an artist is very specific on like it has to be an 85-inch LG screen, I'm like, great, that's expensive. If that's integral to your artwork, who's putting up the bill? Because screens are not cheap, and I think that's another issue in the space is a lot of the screen technology is 5 years behind the art. And they think there's also really unique ways to showcase this artwork, and we should be pushing artists to also explore that, and how also as artists, as someone who works more on the commercial side and curators, having those conversations with these artists on like in that curatorial angle.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on all day about this conversation. But I mean, I think now there's this next layer that we're going to start to see. You know, we had this explosion of people creating digital art, then people collecting digital art, trading digital art, and now we're seeing exhibitions of digital art. The next thing is, how are we going to experience this art in our home? And obviously still, we're not really there yet. I mean, I'm not sure how many, of the raise of hands, how many people have a digital art screen in their house? 1, 2. Amazing.
And how long will those last is another question. Like the screens probably will go, I have one and I just know it's gonna last 2 years max. And
yeah, so we're gonna see new issues with how do we experience this new art movement? How do we bring it into our home? How do we curate our own personal art collection? And I think that's something that the technology will advance and we'll be very reliant on that. But it's going to be an interesting next progression of this whole movement of how we experience the art we've purchased on a day-to-day basis and taking it off the iPhone and our computer and living with it in our homes, which I think is a whole nother level for curators to consider. Is, you know, we can do these fantastic exhibitions with high resolution LED screens and really immersive environments, but then if you purchase the NFT and it's been fit for a certain size screen, how does then that translate to somebody experiencing their work in their own home?
I actually find that the funnest part about what I do is I ship canvases across with my NFT, so it becomes a real world. You're able to see it without the screen. You're able to touch it without the screen. You're able to see the brush strokes and whatnot. So there's a real push for phygital art or physical digital art in the space, and I have a fun way of either sending it to the owner or opting to burn it. and just burning the physical piece right down to the dust because they want to stay anonymous, and I can't send it to an anonymous person. So, no, I've seen the photo frames that we give our grandparents for their birthdays so they can run our digital photos across, and those work. But like you say, the lifespan on these TVs or monitors are only so long, and only last and only appear 100% for so long before errors start to happen within the monitor. And that's why I've been personally pushing the physical aspect of the NFT space and trying to bring sculptors and actual canvas painters into the space as well.
Yeah, I think that is like an interesting bridge as well. It spurred like my other thought of bridging the traditional in this space. I think for me, curation is one of the most exciting areas that we should be pushing more conversations about, because I think there's, as an artist, for all the artists in the audience, one of the best things you can do for your career is network with curators and get these conversations going and get into shows, because there's a very strong correlation of your art market in 50 years and what shows you've been in and who's written about you. Because who is deciding history are the academics, actually, and the institutions. And these are people who are, like, being an academic art historian, you're not making that much money. These are people who are passionate about it, who are wanting to conserve this history and culture. They're not going to be writing, oh, you made 100,000 ETH sale. They're going to be writing about your place in history and why your artwork is important. And that is why you see institutions moving very slowly, because institutions move slowly, like regardless of their writing, and they're wanting to pick out artists, and they've been collecting very silently to preserve this culture and history, and they're wanting to do it not just the big names, but they also know the big names do bring money and that's another conversation that we're not for today. But again, as an ecosystem, I think we really should be pushing curatorial research and conversations. And that's how we actually make the bridge with the traditional art world, because punks and apes are already in art. MoMA already has a massive collection of these. They just don't advertise it yet, and they're going to be writing about it. But again, it's not going to be, oh, these were super expensive. It's going to be like this representative moment in cultural history.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a few in London at the minute. So there's one called W1 Curates. It's on Oxford Circus. That has downstairs under flannels. They have a whole room with floor-to-ceiling, wall-to-wall screens. And Outernet is on Tottenham Court Road, just a block away from W1. And it's just opened. It's a full walk-in, walk-through. I mean, 3 times the stories of this room.
Yeah, with Outernet, one thing though is they are a commercial space that's massive screens. So you can come in and do exhibitions in Outernet. They also have an arts program that runs every Sunday. Unit London is a physical gallery that also has like a Web3 branch that we do digital shows. We just had a show called In Our Code, which was about generative art and the relationship from like the 1960s of input-output, as well as India that was just on here earlier from Gazelli is doing amazing things. The Serpentine has an amazing program, and they've been really, really getting into NFTs actually, and native artists in this space, as well as Art By in Greenwich has probably some of the best curatorial like lens I've seen, and they just launched a new show this last week. It is a trek to Greenwich, but it is totally worth it. Anka Kultis has also been doing a lot of digital work. So there's people in the traditional art world that have been operating. It's just making those connections, and it does move slower. And as well as like Pace is doing a couple things, like major institutions are getting in and they're noticing because they see what great art is being produced.
Yeah. I just like to express that, you know, going back in history, artists were paid nickels and dimes for their art, right? And the auction, whenever they would receive it, they'd get their cut, and then the seller would get their cut. But the artist would never, you know? The artist would still live off of their nickel and dime. This way, NFTs are able to maintain your status quo. It's almost like your stock option, you know, and that's the most exciting thing about this for physical artists right now, is that we're able to, you know, trade ourselves and keep it in the family, and keep the royalties coming back to our kids and our kids' kids and whatnot, and that's never happened before in the art world.
Mm-hmm. Also, decentralization of curation is something we haven't talked about, which is another like launch into topic. But like with that, into smart contracts and royalties, another thing is curators historically have not been paid well as well in the art world. It is a passion profession. Usually there's like what we say in the art world. And they do a lot of heavy lifting. And with that is like a lot of artists, if they are in a show, they can now also pay their curators like on chain, and like every time the artwork is resold, a curator can have a piece of that pie because they did so much. Maybe in that. That's like just like a model people are. And as well as decentralized curation is, it doesn't even have to be one voice anymore. You can have like a fully decentralized group coming together that is even anon to curate a show. So there's so many different models that have been brought up, and I'm not advocating only for like the traditional art model, like but yeah, those are just my last thoughts.
Yeah. Any other questions for us? No, we're good.
Otherwise,
Good. Yeah. I would say you want to find somebody that's working with the style of work that you already are producing, right? Because if you, I don't know what kind of work you do, but we all specialize in specific types of art, right? Like I specialize in new contemporary and urban art. So my stuff is always very fresh. I only work with the living. I'm very much about spotlighting what's going on right now, and observing a cultural shift. So I've traditionally come from the street art background and urban art, and now I'm moving into the digital art and digital fashion as well. So I'm following what I am attracted to from contemporary culture. Most curators have an expertise in a specific area. They're not general kind of experts across everything, right? If you want to have a conversation with me about art history, I would say no, you can speak to Abigail, right? So we all specialize in something. So it's same with gallerists. Like if you want to work with a gallery or work with a curator, align yourself with somebody who resonates with the type of work you're already doing, and that will be so much faster. The conversation will start so much quicker. Mm-hmm. And just make sure you know what you want out of the partnership or the relationship, and to allow time for that relationship to grow.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like minds always are the best route to go. To get my start, I spammed. I'll be honest. I spammed. I sent it everywhere, and I got picked up a couple of places, and then I got to choose. I got to choose where I went and who got to deal with my art, and that was the way that I liked to do it. And that's not necessarily suggested, but that's was the easiest route for me.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of writing. Also in the art world, I think for me there's a very big correlation to some of the best artists also have the best, either they're really good writers or have someone write for them. So being able to illustrate like what you're doing in your artistic practice very clearly, because I can look at something and be like, this is beautiful, but a lot of people work with conceptual art that is a layer deeper. So being able to express clearly who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.